They say every man has a breaking point. But what if yours was buried in a blizzard, with nothing left but a battered dog and a secret someone would kill to keep? When a single gunshot turns the Idaho woods into a battlefield, a wounded German shepherd becomes both the key and the cost of survival. How far would you go for loyalty, justice, or a second chance at hope? Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. This story travels further than any storm. The land at the foot of the Tetons did not offer up its secrets easily. Here, winter arrived before memory and lingered long after the heart believed in spring. For months, the town of Driggs, Idaho, seemed to hold its breath beneath the snow, frozen, forgotten, as if time itself grew tired of pressing onward. Beyond the last row of porch lights, beyond the last mailbox dusted with ice, the pines closed in, silent and immense. Every year, the first real storm came down in sheets, whitening the valley, hushing the world in drifts as high as a man's waist. It was in this place, under these vast pale skies, that Adam Sawyer built a life out of what remained. Adam was a big man. Though the weight he carried was not all muscle, there was a loneliness about him that no amount of winter gear could hide. A gentleness that survived in the way he moved through the forest, never breaking a branch if he could help it. He had been a soldier once, a son to parents who worked land so hard their bodies broke long before their spirits did. Illness took his family early, leaving Adam the kind of grief that settled in the bones, a cold you could not outrun. He returned to Driggs when the fighting was done, alone but for the one friend the world had not managed to take from him. Shadow had been with Adam since his first deployment, a German shepherd, jet black with a silver-touched snout, eyes the color of old whiskey, the kind that seemed to understand before you spoke. Shadow, too, bore scars from things he couldn't name, echoes of explosions, gunfire, and men who never made it home. When Adam left the service, Shadow left too, the two of them bound by a loyalty that felt more like fate than choice. They lived in a cabin a few miles outside of Driggs, beyond the last gravel road, a little structure with sagging beams and windows that wept when the wind came down from the pass. Most mornings, Adam rose before dawn, the air in the cabin so cold his breath turned to frost above the wool blankets. He'd stoke the old stove, careful not to wake Shadow, who slept curled at the foot of the bed, twitching in dreams. Sometimes, the sound of his dog's paws scrabbling across the floor was the only proof Adam had that he was still in the world of the living and not trapped somewhere in memory. There were days when he watched the sun bleed out over the valley, casting everything in blue and gold, and wondered if it was enough simply to go on. He patrolled the forests with a patience born of grief. The people of Driggs did not see much of Adam Sawyer, save for the days he passed through town in his sheriff's truck, hand lifted in a silent wave, Shadow's proud head visible through the cracked passenger window. They called him steady, said he was the type to get the job done, but few could name the price he paid to keep his heart from freezing over entirely. Solitude here was not a punishment. It was a way of surviving. Still, the wilderness had a way of pressing in, blurring the lines between present and past. Adam would move among the trees, eyes searching for prints, of elk, of wolf, sometimes of men. The forests near Grassy Creek were dense, wild, full of secrets. In the years since Adam returned, there had been stories, illegal trappers, poachers who came by night, men moving things through the snow that could poison the water or silence the birds. Adam and Shadow worked as one. tracking, waiting, sometimes chasing men off into the blue dusk, always returning to the silence and the cold. There were moments of warmth, though they were small. Adam's laughter, rare as a January thaw, came only for Shadow, when the dog would nudge his hand with a wet nose or leap to catch snowflakes as they tumbled down in the morning light. In those moments, Adam felt a pulse of something old and hopeful, a reminder that love could survive the coldest winter if you tended it quietly, fiercely, without demand. But beneath it all, the grief never left. Adam kept a photograph tucked in his wallet. His parents, young and smiling before the sickness took them, and himself in uniform, Shadow at his side, both of them unbroken by the years ahead. Each time he ran his fingers over that faded image, he felt the ache of all he'd lost, but also the promise of the one companion left to him. Shadow was more than a dog. He was a living promise that there was still something worth saving in this world, even if you were the last one left to do it. So the days drifted on in Driggs, Idaho, measured not in joy or sorrow, but in small rituals of survival. The creak of boots on the cabin floor, the hiss of coffee on the stove, the hush of snow against the window, the slow, patient pulse of two lives intertwined. Each evening Adam sat with Shadow by the fire, the dog's head heavy against his knee, both of them warmed by a silence that did not ask for more than they could give. Outside, the forest waited. The wind curled through the pine needles, carrying with it the scent of cold earth and coming storms. Somewhere far above, the moon slipped behind the ragged teeth of the Tetons, spilling a ghostly light across the valley floor. In that lonely glow, Adam Sawyer and his loyal dog became two shadows moving through the dark, holding on to each other and the memory of warmth, not knowing how quickly the world could change, nor how easily even the strongest bond could be threatened by what the night might bring. It was the kind of evening when the world seemed to draw itself inward. Beyond the cabin's windows, the sky darkened by degrees, clouds massing above the mountains, pressed low and gray against the teeth of the Tetons. Adam stood on the porch, mug cooling in his hand, gaze fixed on the distant tree line where the last scraps of daylight caught and fluttered. Gold surrendering to blue. He knew the signs, the way the air stiffened, the sudden hush that fell over the animals, the peculiar charge that prickled the skin. A storm was coming, and not the gentle kind. Inside, Shadow paced, restless, as if reading the change in the air. Old instincts surfaced, a military tension that never fully left either of them. Adam checked the radio, listened to static, to weather warnings drifting in and out. Across the county, roads were closing one by one, schools sending out alerts, neighbors buttoning up barns and settling animals for the night. Winter, real winter, had come early this year. He layered up with practiced hands, thermal shirt, wool, his father's old flannel, the navy blue patrol jacket that still smelled faintly of pine smoke and oil. The badge on his chest caught the light as he bent to lace his boots. Shadow watched him from the doorway, tail still, golden eyes bright but uncertain. There was always a risk, heading out when the world locked itself down, but Adam had never learned the art of waiting, not when the valley called, not when the job was unfinished. The call came in as Adam was clipping the leash to Shadow's collar. A voice on the radio, thin and urgent, trembling over the static. Shots fired. Grassy Creek, near the old Ranger's Bridge. Echo on the wind. Could be poachers, maybe worse. Nobody closer than you, Sawyer. Be careful out there. He didn't answer, not with words. He simply looked at Shadow, and the dog seemed to know it was time. Out on the road, visibility shrank to a tunnel of white, flakes as large as coins spinning out of the darkness, battering the windshield, stacking on the wipers. Adam drove slow, headlights barely cutting through the storm. Snow crept into the edges of the world, blurring fence posts and mile markers, eating sound, time, and memory alike. He pressed onward, heart drumming a quiet warning, mind turning over possibilities with the steady, mechanical patience that had kept him alive all these years. Grassy Creek was a place the locals spoke of in low tones, a strip of forest pinched between the river and the mountains, thick with ancient pines and the bones of things best left undisturbed. Rumors had always clustered there, of trappers, of moonshiners, of creatures caught in the ice. Adam had never been one for stories, but tonight, with the storm gnawing at his every step, he felt the weight of them settling in his chest. As the truck rumbled over the rickety wooden bridge at the creek's mouth, something in Shadow changed. The dog rose, nostrils flaring, head swiveling sharply toward the darkness beneath the trees. Adam slowed, window cracked an inch, listening for anything that didn't belong. Wind moaned across the hood, flinging needles of snow into the cab, stinging the raw skin of his knuckles. Somewhere far off, a branch snapped, a sharp, unmistakable report, not like any animal Adam knew. He pulled off the road, tires crunching into the drifts, engine idling with a shiver. For a moment, the two of them sat there in the silence, breath misting in the frozen air. Adam scanned the edge of the forest, searching for any sign of movement, any flicker of light among the endless black trunks. He reached over, squeezed Shadow's shoulder once, then opened the door and stepped out into the teeth of the storm. Cold punched through his layers, stealing the breath from his lungs, burning the inside of his nose. He shouldered the flashlight, unclicked the safety on his sidearm, and trudged forward, boots sinking to the ankles in new snow. Shadow slipped from the truck behind him, low to the ground, every line of his body tense and alert. They moved together, the only living things in a world that felt abandoned by warmth and reason. Each step was an act of faith, a silent promise not to leave the other behind. Flakes swirled in mad patterns coating Adam's eyelashes, filling his ears with a steady, whispering hush. The trees closed in, branches heavy with white, dripping cold tears onto the tracks below. Adam called out once, twice, his voice quickly swallowed by the wind. "Shadow!" No answer, no echo, just the storm. Then nothing. He turned, heart rising in his throat. Shadow was gone. One moment the dog had been there, pressed close at his side, and the next, he was simply missing. Adam's chest constricted, a sudden, irrational panic clawing at the edges of his calm. He turned a slow circle, flashlight arcing over snow and shadows, searching for a glimpse of black fur, a flash of gold. There, by the roots of a fallen pine, the faintest trace, a drag in the snow, a splash of red, too bright, too sudden against all that white. Adam stumbled forward, knees sinking, hands shaking as he traced the trail with frozen fingers. The blood was fresh, bright, already beginning to freeze at the edges. Next to it, the unmistakable imprint of Shadow's paws, staggering, veering off into the thickest part of the woods. He shouted again, but the storm smothered the sound. The world had narrowed to this, a single, desperate path cut through snow and fear. Adam pressed on, boots heavy, lungs burning. Every few yards, another drop of blood, another sign that hope was fading as quickly as the daylight. The wind battered him from all sides, filling his mouth with ice, driving tears from his eyes. He did not allow himself to think. He only moved. Each step was a refusal, to lose, to surrender, to say goodbye. The forest around him felt alive and hostile, every branch reaching for him, every shadow deeper than the last. He followed the trail deeper, further from the road, from safety, from anything that resembled sense. Time bent, stretched, snapped all together. Adam moved by instinct, by memory, by the simple animal certainty that he would not stop until he found the only friend he had left. Finally, as the snow thickened, as the sky turned the color of bruise and bone, Adam paused. The blood trail vanished beneath a drift. The woods stood silent and eternal. He called out once more, but this time, even his own voice felt foreign, unmoored. He was alone. Just a man, a storm, and the weight of love pressed hard against the dark. The world gave no answer, only the cold and the night and the endless, hungry wind. The wind no longer howled, it screamed, a raw and furious chorus twisting through the pines, turning every tree into a question, every shadow into a threat. Adam pressed on, head bowed against the gale, boots slogging through drifts that pulled at his legs like hands trying to keep him from the truth. The beam of his flashlight quivered, illuminating little more than the next desperate step. The world had shrunk to a tunnel of swirling white and the faint, dying marks that shadow had left behind. Each droplet of blood in the snow felt like a plea, a silent confession of pain and need. Adam's lungs burned, the cold carved into his face. But he did not hesitate. For every bitter memory, his parents' sickness, the endless months of fighting, the funerals, there was also the memory of Shadow's warmth, the weight of the dog's head on his knee, the trust in those amber eyes. Adam would not fail him now, not after all they had survived. Time twisted in the storm, losing its grip. Adam moved through the woods like a ghost, the hush broken only by the crunch of his boots and the frantic hammering of his heart. At moments, he nearly lost the trail. A gust of wind would cover the paw prints. A flurry of flakes would swallow the blood. But always, just as fear threatened to overwhelm him, there it would be again, a scuff in the powder, a drop of red, a thread binding him to hope. He passed the twisted skeleton of a deer, its bones jutting through snow like a warning, the tracks of scavengers already blurred by the storm. The trees pressed in, branches laden with snow bowing low, sometimes cracking under their own impossible weight. Adam's breath came in short, ragged bursts. Frost clung to his eyelashes, the stubble on his cheeks stiff with ice. He could have turned back. Should have, maybe. There was no logic in risking his own life so deep in the woods, with the storm closing in. But logic had little to say in the presence of love, and Adam knew, in that private place beyond words, that if the world demanded sacrifice, then this was his to give. The forest seemed to hold its breath as he crested a rise, the snow thinning just enough for the ghostly shape of a cabin to emerge from the white. It leaned drunkenly, half collapsed beneath the crush of years and weather. Its roof sloped low under the weight of old ice, windows blank and lifeless, a single shutter rattling in the wind like a warning. The place felt neither dead nor alive, but suspended, a memory someone had tried to forget. Adam's heart thudded. He remembered dimly stories about this cabin, how old trappers had hidden out here, how sometimes hunters came and never left. It was a place mothers in Driggs warned their children about, a dot on a map circled in fear. He hesitated at the edge of the small clearing, searching for movement, for sound. The wind battered him, relentless. But there, beside the broken steps, a new splash of blood marred the snow, vivid and unmistakable. He forced his aching body forward, every step a battle. He crouched low, examining the marks, not just blood, but paw prints, pressed deep and staggered. Shadow was here. The tracks circled the cabin once, soon, then led to the battered door, where a single human-sized boot print, fresh and broad, stood beside the paw prints. Adam's throat tightened. He reached for his sidearm out of habit, then let it fall. Whoever was here was either gone or didn't care who came looking. He tried the door. It resisted, swollen with ice, hinges creaking in protest. He put his shoulder to it, teeth clenched, and pushed. It gave suddenly, the sound splitting the hush like a gunshot. Cold air poured out, carrying with it a jumble of smells: wet wood, rust, the copper tang of blood, the animal musk of fear and desperation. Inside, the darkness was thick and absolute. Adam fumbled for his flashlight, the beam carving a thin line through the gloom. The room was small, cluttered. An overturned chair, a stove choked with ash, a pile of broken kindling in the corner. His breath showed in clouds, and beneath the scent of rot and old smoke, the sharper notes of pain lingered. He called out, barely more than a whisper, "Shadow." The silence pressed back, suffocating, until the light found him, a huddled shape in the shadows beside the cold hearth. For a split second, Adam's heart stopped. Shadow's body curled in on itself, black fur matted with snow and blood, ribs rising and falling in short, shallow bursts. The dog's eyes met Adam's, wild and distant, pupils blown wide with pain and confusion. Adam dropped to his knees. He reached out, hand trembling, and Shadow flinched, his muscles tensing as if unsure whether this was friend or foe. For a moment, the space between them was filled with all the unspeakable things they had witnessed together, all the loss, the terror, the nights when neither had anyone else in the world. Adam swallowed against a surge of fear and helplessness. He had never seen Shadow like this, not just wounded, but lost, spirit flickering as if about to be blown out for good. He took off his gloves, let his bare hand hover inches from the dog's trembling flank. Shadow's nose twitched, searching for something familiar in the scent. Then, with a shudder, the dog let his head fall onto Adam's palm, the faintest whimper rising from his throat. Adam felt tears burn behind his eyes, but he pressed them back. Not yet. Not now. All around them, the cabin creaked and groaned. Adam gathered Shadow against him, feeling the stickiness of blood, the fragile beat of the dog's heart. In that moment, he knew, whatever darkness had found them, it would not have the last word. The storm battered the cabin's walls, but inside, one small, stubborn light refused to go out. Adam's breath clouded in the bitter air, his hands numb as he fumbled through his battered first aid kit. The cabin's cold pressed into his bones, into the seams of his jacket, into the ache of memory and fear that no amount of training could ever truly prepare a man to face. Shadow lay on his side by the hearth, blood seeping through the fur at his shoulder and ribs, his eyes glazed and glassy, but still searching. still wanting. Adam pressed a scrap of gauze to the wound, feeling the heat of it, how it pulsed with every shallow, trembling breath. There was so little he could do out here. No clinic, no steady light, just the uncertain flicker of a dying flashlight and the moan of the storm battering rotten logs overhead. He wrapped the wound with shaking hands, fingers clumsy, voice rough with effort and pleading as he murmured quiet words, half prayer, half memory, into Shadow's ear. "Stay with me. Don't let go, not now." Outside, the wind rattled the shutter and sent loose snow hissing through the crack beneath the door. Adam's mind spun, trying to remember every field dressing he'd learned back in the war. Every lesson on how to keep a brother alive with nothing but hope and a strip of cloth. The pain in Shadow's eyes was almost human, wide, uncertain, but unyielding. Adam knelt there, the warmth of his own body the only comfort he could offer, the pulse of the dog's heart thudding against his wrist. He forced himself to scan the cabin. Details swam into view through the gloom. The place was old, lived in but abandoned, layers of stories clinging to every crooked board and blackened nail. On the floor near the woodpile, Adam saw it. A spent shell casing, still smelling faintly of gunpowder. The brass stamped with an unfamiliar mark. He pocketed it without thinking, the weight of it cold and ominous. There were other signs, too. A muddy boot print in the half-melted snow just inside the door. The faint imprint of a heel pressed deep, as if someone had paused, listened, hesitated. Against the wall, a crumpled scrap of paper, numbers written in a shaky hand. 1721.4. TH. Adam smoothed it out, lips moving silently over the code. It meant nothing, but the hairs on his arms prickled. Someone had been here. Someone was still watching. On a rickety table beneath the window, Adam spotted a small, battered two-way radio, battery compartment dangling open, corroded contacts exposed. He turned it over in his hands. At first, just static, the click of his thumb echoing in the hush. Then a burst of garbled voices, broken, indistinct, fragments of language sliding through the static. "Package. Move. Before sunrise. Keep low. Don't let..." The words vanished as quickly as they came, swallowed by the white noise of the storm. Adam set the radio aside, tension winding tighter in his chest. The feeling of being watched pressed in. The bullet that tore through Shadow was no accident. Someone meant for this cabin to stay quiet. He built a fire in the broken hearth, feeding it scraps of rotten wood until flames licked weakly at the gloom. The light danced over peeling wallpaper, over the jagged silhouette of a hunting knife stuck in a beam. There were old photographs nailed above the mantel, a man with a rifle and a buck, a dog with wild, laughing eyes, a family long gone to the wind. Adam sat with his back against the cold stone, pulling Shadow close, using his own body to block the draft. In the flicker and hush, Adam felt himself slipping. The old grief came for him. His father's cough in the dark, his mother's trembling hand. The day he came home to an empty house and learned what it meant to be left behind. He remembered the promises he'd made to himself, to his family, to every soldier he couldn't save. And now, here in the cold, he made one more, that whatever evil stalked these woods, whatever darkness had come for Shadow, he would not yield. Shadow stirred, groaning softly as Adam checked the bandage, his eyes drifting, unfocused. Adam fought the urge to weep, forcing his voice low and steady as he stroked the dog's head. He spoke of old days, chasing geese in the tall grass, sleeping beside the stove on winter nights, watching the sun break over the Tetons together. Two silhouettes in a world that was always changing, but never quite enough to break their bond. All the while, the storm battered the cabin, relentless. Adam fed the fire, gnawed on a frozen protein bar, forced himself to stay awake. Every few minutes, he listened for the crunch of boots, the snap of a branch, anything that would mean this wasn't over. The clock in his head ticked out the hours in heartbeats, in the slow creep of ice up the cabin walls. When Shadow finally slept, Adam stood and moved through the shadows, studying every inch of the place. On the far wall, beneath a loose floorboard, he found a set of strange, shallow scratches, marks that looked like someone had tried to erase something, to hide a secret only fear could explain. He pressed his palm to the wall, heart pounding, and wondered if he would ever truly know what haunted this place. Somewhere in the black silence beyond the window, Adam felt it. The eyes of a stranger, the memory of violence, the promise of a reckoning not yet come. But for now, there was only the hush of the fire, the slow, broken breath of the dog he loved, and the cold, eternal winter pressing in from every side. Adam held Shadow close, refusing to let the darkness win, and waited for the first gray hint of dawn, a hope that felt as fragile as it was necessary, burning like a spark in the vast and bitter night. The fire had died down to a bed of sullen coals by the time Adam forced himself to his feet. The storm's rage had not abated. In fact, if anything, it had grown more relentless, the walls of the cabin shuddering under the wind's assault. It would have been easy to stay, to let exhaustion and despair claim him, to wrap his arms around Shadow and sleep until the snow finally buried all memory of struggle. But Adam was not built that way. Some stubborn fiber in his heart refused surrender. He moved through the cabin, gathering what little he could find: a rusted thermos, a battered wool blanket, 2 brittle matches, his own water bottle, half frozen. He tied the blanket around Shadow's body, careful not to disturb the makeshift bandage. The dog was feverish now, breaths coming fast and shallow, ears twitching at every sound. Adam tried his radio once more, but the speaker only coughed static. The world outside remained silent, save for the shrieking of the wind and the far-off groan of shifting trees. He cradled Shadow against his chest, feeling the tremor in the animal's body, the way pain and loyalty warred in those eyes, refusing to leave Adam's face. For a moment, the two were one thing, one small defiance against the hunger of the storm. Stepping outside was like plunging into a river of knives. The wind lashed at his exposed skin, forcing his eyes to narrow, mouth to clamp tight against the sting. Adam bent low, shoulders squared, boots breaking a crooked trail into the drifts. He staggered, nearly losing his footing on the icy step. But Shadow's weight in his arms steadied him, a reminder of the promise he had made in the dark. "I will not leave you. I will not let this be the end." Visibility was reduced to little more than a blur of motion and shadow. Trees appeared as looming, twisted sentinels, branches bowed beneath impossible weight. Adam's flashlight was little help, the battery nearly spent, the cone of light swallowed by the white. He moved by memory, by feel, by the smallest hints. The dip of land toward the creek, the way the wind funneled through a gap in the trees, the faint rise where, in better times, wildflowers grew. Every few dozen paces, he stopped, chest heaving, shifting Shadow's weight to his other arm. The dog stirred, groaned, but did not resist. His eyes, heavy-lidded, flickered with recognition, and in them Adam saw a reflection of his own determination and fear. For a while, the only sound was Adam's breath and the relentless, snarling wind. Then, a break in the pattern. Shadow's nose twitched, head turning as if chasing a scent lost to the storm. He let out a faint whine, legs shifting, a weak but unmistakable urge to move. Adam set the dog down for a moment, kneeling beside him in the lee of a fallen log, and watched as Shadow struggled to his feet. The dog's body was battered, trembling, but something in his stance changed. Ears lifting, muzzle pointed east, deeper into the forest's throat. "Easy, boy," Adam whispered, but Shadow ignored him, pawing at the snow, inching forward on unsteady legs. Adam watched, torn between dread and hope, then made his choice. He rose, gathered Shadow in his arms once more, and turned in the direction his companion had pointed. Step by step, yard by yard, they pressed onward. The cold was a living thing now, gnawing at Adam's face and hands, burrowing through every layer of fabric. Time had no meaning. There was only movement and stillness, only going forward or giving up. Adam did not give up. He passed landmarks he barely remembered. A twisted fence post, the bleached antler of a mule deer, a stone marked with the initials of children long since grown and gone. With each one, hope flared, then faded, then flared again, a rhythm as old as survival itself. At last, when Adam's legs shook and his breath came in sobs, when the black at the edges of his vision threatened to overtake him, he saw it, a distant yellow glow trembling through the trees like a promise. For a heartbeat, he doubted himself, thought it was a trick of exhaustion, a will-o'-the-wisp born of longing. But then Shadow stirred, lifted his head, and whined, a sound of recognition, of need, of home. The light grew stronger, a porch lamp dusted with snow, the outline of a small building, windows fogged with warmth and life. Adam stumbled forward, boots dragging, his voice ragged as he shouted for help, for anyone, for mercy. The door flew open, spilling a wedge of gold onto the ice. There stood Dr. Helen Price, wrapped in a flannel robe, her silver hair wild, eyes wide with shock and compassion. For a moment, Adam could only stand there, legs shaking, Shadow a heavy weight against his chest, the storm howling at his back. Helen moved fast, the steadiness of old friendship overriding any questions. She guided Adam inside, barking orders he barely heard. The warmth of the clinic was a shock, dizzying in its intensity. Adam collapsed to his knees, Shadow sliding from his arms onto a padded table, blood staining the sheet beneath him. Helen's hands were quick, practiced. She pressed a stethoscope to Shadow's chest, checked the bandage, whispered reassurance. Adam watched with the helplessness of the truly desperate, hands shaking, mind whirling. For a moment, all his strength drained out. He wanted to rest, to close his eyes and let Helen take over. But then Shadow stirred, looked at him with a gaze full of trust and terror, and something that felt like forgiveness. Adam pressed his forehead to the dog's, fighting the urge to weep. "You're here," he thought. "You made it." For now, that was enough. Behind them, the wind battered the walls, searching for a way inside. But in that small circle of light, hope flickered, stubborn and bright, a force stronger than any storm. Inside the small clinic, the world felt impossibly distant. Storm sealed away by thick old walls and the steady, practiced hands of Dr. Helen Price. Adam watched as Helen bent over Shadow, her movements precise and unhurried. her face a map of focus and quiet concern. The light in the room glowed honey gold against the snow gathering on the windowsill, wrapping the battered dog in warmth and care that felt almost holy. Helen's fingers moved over Shadow's wounds, peeling back the sodden, blood-stained bandage. She winced, not at the sight of pain, but at what the wound revealed. A deep gash torn ragged by metal, ringed with bruising and fresh swelling. The dog whimpered, but did not pull away. Adam, hands gripped white-knuckled on his knees, forced himself to watch, to be present, to not look away when it mattered most. "I need to get the bullet out," Helen said, her voice low, a river's steady current beneath the words. "If I don't, he won't last the night." She did not ask Adam if he understood, if he was ready. She had seen that answer in the set of his jaw and the way he refused to blink. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound with antiseptic that stung, then using her surgical tools, old but cared for, the steel glinting like hope in the light. Adam stroked Shadow's head, whispering memories of better days, letting his voice be an anchor in the flood of fear. "You're stronger than this. You always were." The operation felt endless, time stretching and twisting with every hitch in Shadow's breath. Then, with a final, careful movement, Helen drew out the bullet, a dull, ugly thing smeared with blood and marked by something unfamiliar. She dropped it into a metal dish, the sound shockingly loud. Adam leaned forward, catching a glimpse of the round. Not a hunter's bullet, not civilian, but police issue, stamped with the tiny crest of the United States Forest Service. Helen met Adam's eyes, the weight of recognition falling between them. "This isn't an accident, Adam. Someone shot him with government ammo, issued only to rangers and feds. No local would have this." Adam felt a coldness different from the winter outside settle inside his chest. "You're sure?" Helen nodded, wiping her brow with the back of her wrist. "I see this in trauma cases brought in by the service. This is theirs." Her gaze sharpened. "And it's not the first time I've seen wounds like this. Not this month. I've had coyotes, a bear cub, dead or dying, all from rounds like these. It's being covered up. Every report I file disappears. The service says it's predator management or poaching incidents, but nothing fits." The words twisted in Adam's mind, connecting like frost across a window. The scrap of paper he'd found in the cabin, the voices on the broken radio, the strange vehicles glimpsed at the edge of the forest, late at night. A web was tightening around his home, and now it had touched the only creature he had left in the world. Helen continued, voice softening but never fragile. "I don't know what they're hiding, Adam, but it's not just animals getting hurt. And anyone who asks too many questions." She trailed off, letting the implications settle. Adam looked down at Shadow, whose breathing was steadier now, body swaddled in clean blankets, eyes half closed in exhaustion, but flickering with trust. He brushed his hand over the dog's flank, feeling the slow drum of a heart still willing to fight. Helen moved to her small desk, pulling out a folder thick with notes, photographs, reports, all half buried by official red tape. She handed Adam a few pages, her lips pressed in a line. Grainy photographs of dead foxes and eagles, tire tracks through soft earth. Tire tread patterns matching those Adam had seen near the cabin, near Grassy Creek. Each document a small wound in the fabric of the place they both called home. "There's more," Helen said, tapping the pile. Neighbors say they've seen trucks driving the old mill road after midnight. No plates, no lights, sometimes masked men. One man tried to take photos. He was threatened, told to stay out of service business. He moved away 2 weeks ago. Adam felt the chill of it. Not in his skin, but deep in his marrow. It was the kind of dread that made a man want to build walls, to bolt doors, to disappear. But he was not made for hiding. Not anymore. He retrieved the battered radio from his jacket pocket, set it on Helen's desk. There's a message on here. Code numbers. Voices saying to move the package before sunrise. Sounds like they're using the storm as cover. Helen's mouth tightened. They always do. Nobody out but ghosts in a blizzard. Or so they think. A heavy silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sound of Shadow's breathing and the distant cry of wind at the eaves. Adam looked again at the bullet, the grainy photos, the notes scrawled in Helen's careful hand. "What are you going to do?" Helen asked, though her voice already knew the answer. Adam looked through the frosted window, watching the snow swirl and settle over the world. "Whatever it takes," he said, voice steady. "I'll find out who did this. I'll put a stop to it." Helen nodded. "Just be careful. They play for keeps." Shadow whimpered in his sleep. Adam reached out, his hand closing over the dog's paw. The storm outside battered the world, but in this small circle of light, resolve began to harden into purpose. A promise made in the presence of love and loss, a line drawn in the snow. Some things could not be forgiven. Some wounds, once opened, demanded justice. The blizzard loosened its grip on Driggs by morning. Though dawn came reluctantly, just a faint bruising of light against the battered windows of Helen's clinic. Shadow slept, deep and dreamless, the steady rise and fall of his chest, a kind of fragile miracle. Adam had barely slept at all. He'd spent the night poring over Helen's notes, tracing the paths of tire treads through mud and memory, trying to fit together the jagged pieces of something foul blooming in the roots of his home. He thought about giving up, about letting someone else, state police maybe, or some faceless investigator from Boise, take over. But he couldn't let it go. Not after the cabin, not after Shadow. Not after watching the forest he loved become a graveyard for things that should have been left wild and free. When Helen finally stirred, she found Adam at the window, watching snow swirl beneath a cold sun. She pressed a mug of black coffee into his hands, her eyes rimmed with fatigue and worry. "Storm's easing," she said. "Roads'll be passable by noon. Shadow's stable, but he shouldn't move much." Adam nodded, the words slow to form. "He'll want to come. If I leave him, he'll just find me anyway." The truth of it landed between them, solid and irrefutable. Shadow had always known where to go, how to find Adam, no matter how bad the weather or the odds. Helen watched him as he finished his coffee, the silence between them thick with history and the kinds of words no one ever really says aloud. "Just be careful, Adam. These men, whoever they are, they're desperate. That's the worst kind." He nodded. There was no heroism in what he planned, only necessity, only the weight of duty and love. He gathered his things quietly, radio, flashlight, a spare roll of bandages. He knelt beside Shadow, brushing his hand along the dog's flank. The wound was fresh, stitched tight, but Shadow's eyes were clear now, the fever broken. Adam whispered his promise, not expecting Shadow to understand the words, but knowing the meaning would pass between them anyway. We finished this together, like always. Outside, the world was a cathedral of white and silence, the storm's teeth dulled for now. Adam steered his old patrol truck along the back roads, Shadow curled in the passenger seat beneath a heavy blanket. They made slow progress, trees drooping beneath new snow, branches like outstretched arms, the river half choked with ice. He avoided the main road, instead taking the forgotten logging tracks he'd learned as a boy, watching for anything out of place. Fresh ruts, a cigarette butt, a crow startled from a branch. Shadow stirred as they neared Grassy Creek, ears pricking, nose twitching. Adam slowed, heart thumping in time with the tires on the frozen ground. It was there, the faintest whiff of diesel and exhaust, barely perceptible through the icy air. Shadow's body tensed, pawing at the glass. Adam parked in the shadow of an old cottonwood, cut the engine, and listened. Silence, but not the natural kind. The birds were gone. The only sound, the slow drip of meltwater from the eaves of a derelict warehouse crouched at the edge of the trees. Adam pulled on his gloves, checked his radio, still little but static, then slipped out, boots crunching softly. He moved around the building's far side, Shadow limping at his heel, every sense attuned to danger. He crouched beneath a cracked window, peering inside. Shapes moved. 3 men, faces shadowed, loading crates from the corner into the back of a battered pickup. One wore the uniform of a federal ranger, the patch bright and false against the mud-stained sleeve. Adam felt his breath catch. Ethan Walsh, the man who'd once taught him to track deer in the spring thaw, whose laugh had filled campfires with warmth. Now his mouth was a grim line, eyes hollow. Adam watched, grief and rage braided tight in his chest. He took out his phone, recording what he could. Faces, license plates, the stamp on the chemical barrels. As he shifted for a better angle, his boot slipped, scattering a shower of ice crystals onto the sill. A head turned. "Hey, did you hear that?" Adam ducked, heart hammering, fingers frozen around his pistol. Shadow bristled, growling low. There was a scrape of boots inside, then the sharp, metallic click of a weapon being readied. He didn't wait. Adam signaled Shadow to run. Dog and man sprinting for the trees, bullets chewing snow behind them, voices roaring in the wake. "Don't let them get away!" Adam dove behind a downed log, Shadow skidding beside him. Branches shattered as gunfire split the cold, the world shrinking to the pulse in his temples and the sting of ice in his lungs. He scrambled for his radio, static hissing, throat raw as he shouted for backup, for Helen, for anyone. Nothing. He checked Shadow, the dog's side heaving, blood blooming again beneath the fresh stitches, eyes wide but unbroken. "Hold on, just hold on." He scanned the tree line, mind racing. They couldn't go back, not now. Ethan's men were spreading out, boots crunching, voices rising in anger and fear. Adam grabbed Shadow, half dragging, half carrying the dog deeper into the thicket, ducking beneath low branches, heart pounding as the world spun around him. A bridge loomed ahead, old, half-rotted, spanning a black tangle of water. Adam slid beneath it, pressing his back to the icy beams. Shadow collapsed at his side, chest hitching, blood darkening the blanket. Above them, boots thundered across the planks, so close Adam could count each step, hear each ragged breath. He held Shadow tight, hand over the dog's muzzle, praying for silence, for mercy, for one more chance. The footsteps faded. For now, they were safe. But Adam knew the hunt was just beginning. And as the snow fell anew, A fresh trail of blood marked the way forward, each drop a promise that nothing, no blizzard, no bullet, no betrayal, would keep him from the truth. Beneath the old bridge, the world shrank to two battered hearts and a patch of frozen ground. Adam pressed Shadow close, feeling the dog's shuddering breath against his side, blood seeping through the rough blanket. Overhead, the footsteps had faded, but the danger remained. A pressure in the air, a certainty that the men hunting them would not rest until every secret was smothered beneath the snow. Adam wiped ice from his lashes and studied Shadow's wound. The stitches had torn, crimson soaking into matted fur. There was no time, no shelter, only the trembling edge between flight and the moment you decide to turn and face what follows you. Adam searched the tree line, mind racing through memories of tactics learned long ago. How to set a trap, how to vanish, how to endure until dawn. But this wasn't war, not the kind that ended with a surrender or a treaty or medals handed out beneath a flag. This was something closer, smaller, crueler. The kind of war waged when home itself is threatened, when love is all you have left to lose. He risked a glance above the bank. Ethan Walsh and two others, faces half hidden by scarves and shadows, had regrouped by the derelict warehouse, rifles slung, voices low and angry. In the cold light, Ethan's eyes flickered with something that wasn't quite hatred and wasn't quite remorse. Adam watched as the man he once called friend paced, barking orders, pointing toward the trees where Adam and Shadow had vanished like ghosts. They would search the river, then the woods. They would not stop. Adam's mind ticked through possibilities, discarding each as quickly as it came. He needed a distraction, a way to split the group, to buy time to circle back toward the warehouse. The chemicals, those barrels, if he could puncture them, leak the toxic contents into the creek, he could force Ethan's crew into the open, disrupt whatever handoff was planned. It was reckless, desperate, but desperation was all he had left. He squeezed Shadow's shoulder. The dog's eyes, fevered but determined, locked with his own. There was pain there, but also trust, a willingness to follow Adam wherever the path led, even if it rest straight through fire. With his last reserves of strength, Adam drew his service knife and cut the blanket into strips, winding one around Shadow's shoulder, the other tying tight around his own bleeding arm. He muttered a promise, barely more than breath, then crawled from the shelter of the bridge, Shadow at his heel, the two moving low and silent along the edge of the creek. The world above was chaos. Ethan's men shouting, boots crunching, rifle bolts racked and ready. Adam slipped through the shadows, circling the backside of the warehouse, eyes searching for the stack of barrels he'd glimpsed through broken glass. There, lined up along the loading dock, marked with symbols he recognized from Helen's file. Respiratory hazard. Flammable. The sort of poison that could seep into water and kill silently for years. He fished a road flare from his coat, teeth chattering as he scraped the cap free. He struck it, the head sparking to life, red as a wound in the darkness. In one fluid motion, he hurled the burning flare beneath the barrels, where spilled liquid soaked the ground. Flames leapt, licking blue and green, smoke billowing up with a bitter chemical tang. Shouts erupted as the fire caught, Ethan's men turning as one, scrambling for hoses, for buckets, for any means to fight back the rising inferno. In the confusion, Adam darted inside, Shadow limping at his side. The warehouse was a maze of boxes, tarps, and tools, half remembered from childhood, now twisted by secrecy and fear. At the center, a cache of weapons and cash, evidence enough to send a man away for decades. Adam snapped photos, fingers shaking, heart hammering in his chest. He heard boots on concrete, heavy, deliberate, the echo of a voice he once trusted. Ethan appeared in the door, rifle raised, face a ruin of guilt and fury. "Adam," he called, voice ragged. "It didn't have to be this way." Adam stepped between Shadow and the rifle's muzzle, eyes never leaving Ethan's. "You shot my dog, poisoned my home. For what? A debt? A promise to men who'd leave you in the snow?" Ethan's hands shook, the barrel wavering. "You don't understand. They have my family, Adam. They said if I didn't help—" His voice broke, the truth tumbling out. "I tried to warn you, but it was too late." A gunshot cracked the night, a wild shot, not aimed. Adam dove, dragging Shadow behind a crate. Another shot splintered wood inches from his head. He shouted for Ethan to stop, to remember who he was, but the answer was another bullet. Then silence. Then movement. A third man, masked, charging through the smoke. Shadow lunged, teeth bared, intercepting the stranger just as a pistol flashed. The dog's body hit the man hard, jaws clamped on the attacker's wrist, forcing the weapon away from Adam. The stranger shrieked, twisting, trying to throw Shadow off, but the German shepherd held fast, loyal even as blood stained the floor beneath him. Adam surged forward, wrestling the pistol away, striking the attacker with all the fury he'd kept hidden for years. Grief, fear, rage at all that had been lost. The masked man went down, groaning. In the chaos, Ethan lowered his rifle, eyes filling with tears. Sirens rose in the distance. Helen, maybe. Or backup called by some neighbor with a police scanner. The spell was broken. Adam knelt, cradling Shadow, the dog's breath ragged, his eyes fixed on Adam's face, so, as if to say, "Did I do right?" Adam nodded, voice raw. "You saved me. You always do." Outside, men surrendered to the blizzard's cold arms. Inside, as the fire died down, Adam and Shadow, both scarred, both changed, knew the worst was over, but the cost would linger in every scar, every memory. Nothing would be the same again. The storm was spent, but its scars lingered in the hush of dawn. Blue light seeped across the valley, sharpening the edges of every wound, on the land, in memory, and in flesh. Sirens wailed down the logging road, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the battered snowbanks as the first responders drew near. For a while, Adam could only kneel in the ruins of the warehouse. The wreckage of barrels and broken crates sprawled around him, like the remains of some old dream, long gone to rot. Shadow slumped against his side, exhausted and bleeding anew, eyes barely open but still tracing Adam's every breath. Adam pressed his hands to the dog's side, murmured soft nothings, half comfort, half apology, while the world shifted from chaos to aftermath. Somewhere in the fading smoke, boots crunched, deputies, local police, state troopers, faces Adam recognized through years of shared hardship and fleeting trust. Helen was the first through the doors, shoulders squared, jaw set in the determined calm that had carried her through war and widowhood alike. Her gaze found Adam, then Shadow, and softened only for a heartbeat before she was moving, giving orders, directing paramedics, clearing space for the living and the wounded. Adam let the others lift Shadow onto a stretcher, watched as Helen pressed her palm gently to the dog's brow and whispered something only Shadow could hear. They loaded the German shepherd into the back of Helen's battered truck. siren wailing as she sped toward her clinic. Adam followed, silent, shivering, the adrenaline gone, and only bone-deep fatigue remaining. The ride was a blur, radio chatter, the creak of winter tires, Helen's steady hand on the wheel. In the back seat, Shadow's chest rose and fell, each breath a battle, each moment a stubborn refusal to let go. At the clinic, Helen worked with the efficiency of someone who knew loss intimately. She stitched Shadow's wounds, changed the dressings, checked the dog's vitals with careful, trembling hands. Adam hovered nearby, sometimes pacing, sometimes frozen, caught in the gravity of waiting. He watched as Helen's lips pressed to a thin line, her brow furrowed with worry. There was nothing to do but hope. Meanwhile, the investigation began in earnest. Evidence was gathered. The chemical drums marked for destruction, crates of cash and contraband, Ethan Walsh's battered badge found beneath a pile of torn uniforms. The warehouse became a crime scene. Federal agents moving through with cameras and grim faces. Ethan himself was cuffed and silent, eyes red-rimmed as the story spilled out. His debts, the threats to his family, the slow corrosion of hope that made a good man turn bad. In the quiet room where he waited to be transported, Adam found him, sat across the table, let the silence fill the space between old friends. For a long time, Ethan didn't speak. Then, with a voice dry as paper, he said, "I'm sorry, Adam. I lost the thread of who I was. I never wanted to hurt Shadow, or you. I just couldn't see a way out." Adam looked at his former friend, saw the boy who'd once run wild with him through the Teton woods, the young ranger who'd taught him to read the river's secret language. He saw the man undone by desperation, haunted by choices made in midnight hours. There was no easy forgiveness, no righteous anger, only a kind of mourning, deep and cold as the winter outside. "I know," Adam said, voice barely above a whisper. "We both lost things we can't get back." Ethan broke down then, shoulders shaking, tears mixing with the dirt on his face. Adam stayed, silent, until a deputy came for the prisoner, leading him away down a corridor lined with fading daylight. The days that followed blurred, statements given, evidence processed, the slow, methodical grind of justice making its way through small-town courts and federal offices alike. Word spread in Driggs and beyond, a ring of corruption exposed, an operation broken open by the courage of one battered man and his faithful dog. There was pride, yes, but also sorrow, and a sober reckoning with the wounds that would take much longer to heal. At Helen's clinic, Adam kept his vigil, night and day. He slept in a chair beside Shadow, fed the dog by hand when he would eat, cleaned the wounds with the tenderness of a brother in arms. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, he would lay his hand on Shadow's chest, feeling the gentle rise and fall, whispering prayers to any god who would listen. Please, just one more day. One afternoon, as the sun poured in across the frost-laced windows, Shadow stirred. He lifted his head, eyes clear for the first time in days, and thumped his tail, just once, slow and sure, against the blankets. Adam's heart cracked wide, joy and relief and the ache of every near loss washing through him in a wave. Helen came in, eyes shining. "He's a tough one. Strongest heart I've seen. You did well, Adam. You both did." Adam only nodded, brushing his hand over the dog's fur. In that moment, he understood something simple and eternal. Some things, no matter how battered, refuse to break. Some bonds, sealed by trust and tested by storm, hold fast against the worst the world can offer. Outside, the last of the blizzard melted into soft sunlight, the air sweet with the promise of spring. For the first time in a long while, Adam allowed himself to hope. He leaned his head close to Shadow's, whispered a wordless thank you, and sat quietly as the world, at last, began to heal. Spring in Driggs did not arrive all at once, but in small, careful gestures, a trickle of meltwater beneath the eaves, a softening in the wind, sunlight that lingered just a moment longer on the porch steps of Adam's cabin. The long bruises of winter faded from the land, and with each day, the world seemed to remember how to hope again. A month had passed since the night of the fire, the gunshots, the old wounds torn open and stitched closed again. Time had lost its frantic edge. Life settled into something quieter, measured by the gentle rituals of healing. Shadow's fur had grown back in a ragged silver patch across his shoulder. The limp in his step remained, a ghost of suffering that would never fully depart. But the spark in his eyes was undimmed, bright as ever. The town of Driggs gathered at the courthouse on a soft April morning, a celebration hushed by memory. Neighbors, friends, strangers who'd only watched the drama unfold through rumor and newsprint, all came to see the battered deputy and his dog. The old mayor, hands shaking as he pinned the honorary K9 medal to Shadow's collar, voice quivering as he recited words of gratitude for courage, for loyalty, for the kind of sacrifice that could not be bought or borrowed, only given. Adam stood with Shadow at his side, one hand tangled in the dog's scruff, the other holding his battered Stetson to his chest. For once he felt the weight of eyes on him not as judgment, but as welcome. He met Helen's gaze in the crowd, steady, approving, touched by the gentle light of understanding. For all they had lost, they had found something too. The unbreakable bond of those who walk through fire and come out the other side changed, but still together. Later, under a sky the color of pewter and pearl, Adam returned to the place where it all began. The old cabin, no longer a ruin, but a living promise. Townsfolk and volunteers had come together, boards replaced, windows washed, a new sign hung with careful hands. Teton Rescue and Recovery Center. Here lost and wounded things would find shelter. Here a history of fear had become a future of hope. Adam wandered the rooms, running his hand along new wood still sharp with the scent of sap and spring. In the corner by the hearth, he found a photograph, Shadow and himself, eyes tired but proud, caught in the silent gratitude of survival. He pinned it to the wall. Beneath the pictures of other rescued animals, other quiet heroes whose stories would be told in softer voices. Sometimes, at dusk, Adam sat by the creek behind the center, watching the sun slip behind the snow-draped Tetons. Shadow pressed close against his knee. He thought of all the ways life could have broken differently. The nights alone, the storms that nearly claimed them, the faces of friends lost to time or to darkness. He thought of Ethan Walsh, now serving his sentence, letters arriving in Adam's mailbox every few weeks. They were confessions, apologies, stories of a man learning too late, the price of surrender and the value of second chances. Adam wrote back, not with anger, but with the wary forgiveness that comes from understanding the wounds a heart can carry, and the way one bad choice can bloom like poison. He sent photographs of Shadow, of the center, of the small, good things that filled the days now. In every letter he included a promise. We heal one day at a time. The wounds that Adam bore, the loss of his parents, the guilt of war, the terrible ache of almost losing Shadow, never truly left. But they softened, edges blunted by new routines. Morning walks with Shadow through the thawing woods, evenings spent sharing quiet company with Helen over coffee and memories. The pain became part of him, but not the largest part. What remained was gratitude, fierce and abiding, for the chance to begin again. The townsfolk, too, learned to believe in renewal. Children played in the center's yard, feeding treats to rescued dogs, planting wildflowers by the fence line. Tourists stopped to hear the story of the blizzard, the fire, the bond between a soldier and his dog. Some cried, some smiled, most simply nodded, recognizing in Adam's story the universal ache of longing and the miracle of being found. One evening, as twilight bled across the valley and the world softened into blue and gold, Adam sat with Shadow at the water's edge. The creek murmured of old hurts and new beginnings. Shadow rested his chin on Adam's boot, eyes half closed, the scar on his shoulder catching the last light. Adam whispered, "Thank you, old friend, for every step, for every second chance." The world turned, slow and certain. In the hush that followed, Adam felt the simple, sacred pulse of a life reclaimed, not perfect, not unscarred, but fiercely, quietly whole.